I got a call from the hospital. My son was in intensive care, heart attack. I rushed over, and a nurse grabbed my hand and hid me in the ward. Shh! Watch. What I saw. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The afternoon stretched quiet around me, the kind of stillness that settles into a house when you've lived alone long enough. I sat at my kitchen table with tax documents spread before me, numbers blurring as my reading glasses slipped down my nose. The coffee beside me had gone cold. Then my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something in the pattern felt urgent. My hand moved toward it automatically, the way it had for 32 years, whenever the fire station alarm sounded. "Mr. Mills, this is Phoenix General Medical Center." The woman's voice carried professional sympathy. "Your son Keith has been admitted to our intensive care unit. You need to come immediately. It's his heart." The phone slipped through my fingers. I caught it against my chest. What happened?" "The doctors are with him now. Please come as quickly as you can." She disconnected before I could ask anything else. My chair scraped backward. The coffee mug toppled as I stood, brown liquid spreading across my property tax assessment. I didn't stop. Keys. Where were my keys? My hands shook as I patted my pockets, scanned the counter. There, by the microwave, next to Keith's vitamins. The ones he'd left this morning, with a comment about how I should take better care of myself. The irony stabbed through my chest as I grabbed the keys and ran. Traffic lights conspired against me. Every intersection flashed yellow, just as I approached. I ran too. The steering wheel felt slick under my palms despite the air conditioning. My mind refused to settle, kept jumping between the present and fragments of the past 6 months. Keith and Gertrude had moved in after their eviction. "Just temporary, Dad," Keith had promised, his smile tight. "Just until we get back on our feet." That was February. Now it was August, and they'd settled into my spare bedroom like permanent residents. A silver sedan ahead braked suddenly. I swerved around it, horn blaring. The money questions had started in April, casual at first. "You ever think about what you'll do with all that?" Gertrude had asked one evening, gesturing around my living room. "What happens to it when you're gone?" I'd deflected, changed the subject. But the questions kept coming, wrapped in different words, delivered with increasing frequency. Keith never asked directly. He'd let Gertrude probe while he watched, gauging my reactions. The hospital loomed ahead, concrete bulk interrupting the desert skyline. I yanked the wheel right, tires squealing as I cut across 2 lanes. My truck lurched to a stop across 2 parking spaces. I didn't care. Didn't even check if I'd locked the doors before I sprinted toward the entrance. Fluorescent lights assaulted me as I burst through. The antiseptic smell hit next. That distinctive hospital mixture I'd encountered too many times on emergency calls. My firefighter instincts kicked in automatically. Assess the scene, locate the danger, identify who needs help. The waiting area sprawled to my left. A dozen people scattered across plastic chairs, most staring at phones, trying to ignore whatever crisis had brought them here. But I saw her immediately. Gertrude stood near the corridor leading to intensive care, one hand pressed against the wall, her other hand clutched a tissue. Mascara streaked down her cheeks in artistic lines. Her shoulders shook with what should have been sobs. But something felt wrong. I'd spent 3 decades reading emergency scenes in seconds, separating real victims from performances. Training like that doesn't switch off. It becomes part of how you see the world. I moved toward her, boots echoing against linoleum. She looked up as I approached, and for just a fraction of a second, so brief I might have imagined it, her expression was blank. Calculating? Then her face crumpled, and the performance resumed. "Orval!" Her voice broke beautifully. "Oh, thank goodness you're here. It happened so suddenly. He just collapsed. They won't tell me anything." Each word tumbled over the last, exactly how someone in genuine distress might speak. But her eyes tracked my face with too much precision, watching for my reaction rather than seeking comfort. I kept my voice steady, falling back on the calm I'd learned to project. "Where is he? What did the doctors say?" "ICU." She pointed toward the corridor, the tissue fluttering. "They're running tests. They said it might be serious. We need to be prepared for anything." The words came too smoothly, too rehearsed. I started toward the ICU corridor, but she shifted position, putting herself between me and the hallway. Subtle, almost natural, but deliberate. Wait, Orval, the doctor said we shouldn't all crowd in there. Let me go first and... Her perfectly manicured nails caught the fluorescent light as she reached for my arm. Red polish, recently applied. Not a chip visible. Those weren't the hands of someone who'd just watched their husband collapse. Those were hands that had spent time preparing. The mascara on her cheek suddenly looked less like grief and more like stage makeup, carefully smudged to appear authentic from a distance, but too symmetrical up close. My son was 37 years old enough to make his own choices, old enough to face the consequences. And as I looked at Gertrude, at the calculation hiding behind her theatrical distress, at the way she positioned herself like a guard rather than a grieving wife, I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not panic, not fear, recognition. I'd walked into burning buildings for most of my adult life. I knew the difference between real danger and smoke screens. This was a performance, and I was the intended audience. I looked past her toward the ICU corridor, where fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh relief, and wondered what scene was really playing out behind those doors. I moved past Gertrude with a sidestep that had nothing to do with courtesy. She made a small sound, but I was already through, heading down the corridor. The ICU entrance stood ahead. I'd almost reached it when someone grabbed my arm. A woman in blue scrubs materialized from a doorway. "Mr. Mills?" Her voice came urgent and low. "Don't go in there yet, please. You need to see this first." I started to pull away, but something in her face stopped me. She wasn't scared, she was angry. "Trust me," she whispered, already pulling me backward. "Room 7. I let her guide me into an unused consultation room. She closed the door until only a crack remained, positioned me where I could see through the gap. Her finger went to her lips, silence, and she pointed. Through the opening, I had a direct line into one of the ICU rooms. Inside, under fluorescent lights, I saw my son. Keith stood beside a hospital bed, not lying in it, standing, completely vertical and healthy. He was laughing. A man in a white coat stood with him. Doctor, from the stethoscope. He was smiling, like Keith had just told an amusing story. "The old man will panic when he thinks I'm dying." Keith's voice drifted through, faint but audible. "That's when we get him to sign the power of attorney. Gertrude keeps him emotional. Classic shock tactic." My chest constricted, not from a heart attack, from something worse. The doctor tapped his tablet. "The documents will look legitimate. Heart attack symptoms are easy to fake in records. By tomorrow morning, you'll have access to everything." "Everything," Keith repeated. "Dad's been sitting on that money for years. $280,000 in savings, gathering dust while he clips coupons. Plus the house, $300,000, easy. It's time someone actually used it." He walked to the window, hands in his pockets. Healthy, no chest pain, no shortness of breath. "He won't know what hit him," Keith said. "Old man'll be so grateful I survived. He'll sign whatever we put in front of him. Once we have power of attorney, we drain the accounts, transfer the house title, be gone before he realizes." "What about after?" The doctor's question came carefully. "When he figures it out," Keith shrugged. "He's 64. Who's going to believe him over official medical records? We'll say he got confused, maybe suggest early dementia. Our word, backed by documentation, against his." The doctor nodded. "For $15,000, I can make those records ironclad." $15,000 is nothing compared to what we're getting." Keith turned from the window. "Besides, dear old dad taught me to think long-term, plan ahead." He laughed. "Guess those firefighter lessons paid off after all." The nurse beside me leaned close. "I heard them planning this about an hour ago. I was in the next room. I've seen too many families destroyed by schemes like this. You deserve to know." I couldn't respond, couldn't move. My son, my only son. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike, helped through college, bailed out of every disaster, who'd called me at 3 a.m. from New Mexico, knowing I'd drive 6 hours, who'd grip my hand at his mother's funeral. That son wanted to rob me, and he was laughing about it. The nurse touched my shoulder. "Mr. Mills?" I pulled in a breath, then another. Firefighter training. Control your breathing, control your mind, control the situation. Something shifted inside me. The shock melted away, replaced by something colder, harder. I'd spent 32 years running into burning buildings. 32 years saving people who couldn't save themselves. I'd pulled children from smoke-filled bedrooms, carried unconscious adults down ladders, performed CPR until my arms went numb. And my own son thought he could rob me blind, thought I was just a foolish old man, easy prey, someone to manipulate with fake tears and manufactured emergencies. He had no idea what he'd just started. I looked at the nurse. Lines around her eyes spoke of long shifts and difficult decisions, the bearing of someone who'd spent decades in emergency medicine and still had the moral compass to risk her job. "What's your name?" I asked. "Grace Nichols, 28 years nursing here." She met my eyes squarely. "Long enough to know when something's wrong." I nodded once. "Thank you, Grace." Through the crack, Keith checked his phone, completely relaxed. The doctor had moved to the computer, probably falsifying records, creating evidence of an illness that didn't exist. Gertrude was out in the waiting room, maintaining her performance, playing the devastated wife, establishing the narrative. They'd planned this carefully, considered the angles. They thought they had all the pieces in place, but they'd made one critical miscalculation. They'd forgotten that I'd spent 3 decades assessing emergency situations, reading people under pressure, developing strategy in seconds while chaos erupted around me. They'd forgotten that the best firefighters aren't the ones who rush in without thinking. They're the ones who observe, plan, and strike at exactly the right moment. Keith wanted to play games with his dying father, wanted to manipulate my fear and grief for profit. Fine, I could play too. And I had 32 years of experience staying calm in situations that would make most people crack. I looked at Grace again. They can't know I heard this. Not yet. She understood immediately. "What do you need?" "Time," I said, "and evidence." Her expression shifted, something fierce appearing. "I'm listening." Outside the door, in that ICU room, my son continued his performance, continued believing he'd won. But the real game was just beginning, and this time, I was writing the rules. Grace shifted her weight, checking her watch. "We need to move fast. Grant could start altering records tonight." Years of emergency calls had taught me. Panic kills. Planning saves lives. "What do we need?" "Keith's real medical file. Proof there's no cardiac history. And if we can get Grant's communications..." She paused, calculating. "He's careless. Leaves his tablet everywhere." "Can you access the records?" "I'm a charge nurse. I can pull any patient file. But if Grant changes them by morning, we'll have nothing." "Then we move now." She studied my face. "Why am I doing this? I don't even know you." "But you know what's right. Too many times I've seen families destroyed by greed dressed up as concern." Her voice went quiet. "Someone has to stand up." Through the crack, Keith checked his phone, laughing, completely at ease. Grace straightened. 15 minutes. Stay here. If they leave that room, text me." She rattled off her number. I programmed it while she slipped out, moving with practiced hospital efficiency, quick steps but not rushed, badge swinging, natural, invisible. I watched her cross toward the records area, disappearing behind a partition. The minutes crawled. 12 minutes passed. Grace reappeared, walking past Keith's room without a glance. She carried a folder naturally. Just another nurse with paperwork. But as she passed the staff lounge, she paused, glanced inside, entered. 14 minutes. She emerged holding her phone oddly, screen pointed down, taking photos. When she looked toward room 7, I saw it in her expression. She'd found something. Grace returned through the service corridor. "Got it." She showed me her phone. His actual file, routine physicals, no cardiac complaints. EKG from 6 months ago, completely normal. I scrolled through the images, evidence, ammunition, and this. She swiped to new photos, text messages on a tablet screen. K. Doctor still on board? Need confirmation. UG 15K confirms everything. Records will show critical condition by morning. K. Dad arrives tomorrow, thinking I'm dying. That's when G gets the POA signed. WG, make it convincing. K. We've been rehearsing for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Grant left his tablet in the lounge. Didn't even lock the screen. Grace's voice held satisfaction. I photographed everything relevant. I stared at the messages. 3 weeks of planning. You've given me everything I need. We've given you everything. She touched my arm briefly. Take the service exit. Gertrude's still in the waiting area. Go home, document everything. Tomorrow we file formal complaints. This will damage your career. My career means nothing if I stay silent. I'll email you copies within an hour. Go. I left through corridors I'd never seen, past laundry carts and loading docks, through staff-only doors. The parking lot felt impossibly bright. The drive home took 20 minutes I barely remember. My mind ran calculations. Evidence secured, timeline established, conspirators identified, like a fire inspection report. I pulled into my driveway as sunset stained the sky orange. The house looked exactly as I'd left it, but that security had been an illusion. I unlocked the door and immediately knew. Someone had been in my study. The door stood slightly ajar when I always closed it completely. Papers on my desk sat at wrong angles. The safe in the closet wasn't quite flush against the wall. I stood in the doorway, training my eyes like at fire scenes. Observe before you move. I photographed everything. Then I entered. My desk drawers had been opened and closed, not quite returned to their original positions. Someone had rifled through files. Financial documents were out of order. The folder containing my house deed had been moved. They'd inventoried my life. I checked the trash can, crumpled paper. I smoothed it flat. A printed list in Gertrude's handwriting. Bank names, account numbers, balances. My retirement fund, my savings accounts. The investment account I'd built over decades. Next to each one, small check marks, like items on a shopping list. At the bottom, circled twice. House equity, $300K. They'd researched everything. Come into my home, the home I'd invited them into when they needed help, and cataloged what they could steal. I photographed the list, then placed it in a clear plastic sleeve. Evidence. This room had been my sanctuary, where I'd worked on inspection reports, where I'd sat after my wife's funeral, trying to figure out how to keep living. And they'd violated it. I sat at my desk, laid the evidence before me. Grace's photos on my phone, the printed bank list, documentation of the disturbed study, 3 weeks of planning, hospital fraud, home invasion of privacy. They'd made one critical mistake. They'd forgotten that I'd spent decades investigating hazards, documenting violations, building cases that resulted in citations and shutdowns. And now, I had all the evidence I needed. Outside, darkness settled. Gertrude's car wasn't in the driveway, still at the hospital, playing the devastated wife. Tomorrow, they'd try to spring their trap. But tomorrow, I'd spring mine. Evening deepened the shadows in my study. I turned on the desk lamp, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and began writing. Decades of inspection reports had taught me that documentation defeats denial. I organized the evidence: medical fraud, conspiracy, intent. Under each heading, I listed what I knew, what I could prove, what I needed. My phone buzzed. Email from Grace with encrypted attachments. Every photo she'd taken, plus a timeline. I downloaded everything to 3 separate drives. Then, I made the first call. Grace, it's Orville Mills. I found evidence they searched my house, printed my bank accounts, went through files. Can you file a formal complaint with the Arizona Medical Board tomorrow morning? Already working on it. Her response came immediately. I have everything documented, Grant's messages, Keith's file, showing no cardiac issues, the timeline. I'll submit it when they open at 8. This puts your career at risk. A pause. My career means nothing if I stay silent. I've seen too many families destroyed. Not this time. You'll have a copy by midnight. I hung up and pulled my laptop closer. Time for research. Arizona attorneys specializing in estate fraud. I filtered by reviews, eliminated the flashy websites. Found one. Martin Clark, 30 years experience, former prosecutor, elder fraud cases. His office rang 4 times. Clark Legal Associates. This is Orville Mills. I need an emergency consultation tomorrow morning. My son is attempting to defraud me using falsified medical documents. I have evidence and they're planning to execute within 24 hours. Hold, please. 60 seconds. Then a different voice, older, measured. This is Martin Clark. How solid is your evidence? Photographs of text messages between my son and a doctor discussing payment. Copies of my son's actual medical file showing no cardiac history. Proof they searched my home and documented my assets. A nurse witness willing to testify. 9 a.m. tomorrow, bring everything. His voice held approval. And Mr. Mills, don't let them know you're aware. Let the law do its work. Understood. I pulled out my safe. House deed, solely in my name. Bank statements, no co-signers. My current will, dated 5 years ago, leaving everything to Keith. That will needed to change. I laid everything on the desk and began building the case. Fact. Keith and Gertrude lived here by verbal agreement. No lease, no rental contract. Fact. The house belonged to me, alone. Purchased before Keith was born, paid off through my salary. Fact. My bank accounts required only my signature. No power of attorney existed. Fact. They had no legal claim to anything. Their entire plan depended on me signing documents while emotional, on me believing Keith was dying. But I wasn't panicked. I wasn't desperate. I was furious. And I was methodical. I wrote my 3-part strategy in block letters. 1. Medical board destroys Grant's license, removes their inside access. 2. Legal eviction removes Keith and Gertrude from my property. 3. New will removes Keith as beneficiary, eliminates their motive, simple, legal, devastating. I checked my watch. Nearly 9 p.m. Keith and Gertrude hadn't returned yet, staying at the hospital, maintaining the illusion, sleeping in chairs, looking distraught for the night staff. Let them. Tomorrow they'd return expecting to find me shattered, ready to sign anything. They'd prepared documents, practiced performances, already spent my money in their imaginations. They had no idea tomorrow was when everything would collapse. I pulled out file folders, labeled them evidence, medical, evidence, financial, evidence, property, legal documents, printed copies of everything Grace sent, added the bank account list, photos of my disturbed study. The folder for the lawyer grew thick. My phone buzzed. Grace's formal medical board complaint. 12 pages detailing Dr. Wayne Grant's conspiracy. Witness statement, evidence attachments, request for immediate investigation and license suspension. I saved it, backed it up, printed a copy. The house creaked, settling into night. Their bedroom door stood open down the hall, unmade bed, Gertrude's clothes scattered, Keith's laptop charging, evidence of people who'd made themselves comfortable while planning to rob me. Tomorrow, that door would close for the last time. I reviewed my notes. Grace would file at 8. I'd meet Clark at 9. By afternoon, I'd have legal strategies in motion, the yellow legal pad filled with action items, evidence organized and backed up, medical board complaint, ready attorney consultation, scheduled legal documents secured, timeline, documented home, invasion, preserved 3 weeks they'd spent planning, 3 weeks of secret meetings and rehearsed performances. I'd spent 3 hours turning their conspiracy into evidence. Turns out inspector training applies to more than fires. Find the weakness before it collapses. Document the violations before they spread. Their weakness? Arrogance. They thought I was old and trusting. Thought a fake medical emergency would break me. They'd forgotten that emergency responders don't break. We adapt. We strategize. We overcome. I closed the folders, stacked them precisely. The desk lamp cast long shadows. Outside, the street lay quiet. Keith and Gertrude were at the hospital, believing they had won. But tomorrow morning, the fire inspector would begin his final inspection, and this time, the building was going to fail. Morning light cut through my bedroom blinds. March 13th, Execution Day. I'd heard Keith and Gertrude return around midnight, hushed voices in the hallway, their bedroom door closing softly, playing the concerned couple, exhausted from their hospital vigil. I'd stayed in my locked room, reviewing strategy until my eyes burned. Now I dressed deliberately. Not retirement casual, slacks, button-down shirt, leather shoes I hadn't worn in months, business attire for business that needed doing. The folder sat on my desk where I'd left it, medical records, text messages, Grace's witness statement, Gertrude's asset list. Each piece labeled, indexed, ready. My phone buzzed at 7:45. It's done. Grace's voice carried quiet satisfaction. The complaint is filed. Every document, every photograph, my full statement. The medical board promised expedited review given the fraud allegations. Thank you, Grace. I kept my voice low. Keith and Gertrude were still asleep down the hall. I won't forget what you're risking. Just make sure it counts. Men like Grant shouldn't practice medicine. I also filed with hospital administration this morning. Ethics violation, conspiracy to falsify records. 2 fronts. Better than one? You're thorough. 30 years taught me which buttons to push. She paused. How are you holding up? I'm fine. This is just another inspection. Document the violations, recommend corrections. Except, the violations are personal this time. That doesn't change the process. I stood at my kitchen counter, drinking bitter coffee while reviewing the folder one last time. Inspector's habit. Check your equipment, verify your plan, execute with precision. The drive to Martin Clark's office took 30 minutes through morning traffic. Downtown Phoenix gleamed in early heat, glass towers reflecting sunlight. I parked in the visitor space, carried the folder under my arm, rode the elevator to the 7th floor. Clark's office matched the man, organized, professional, no wasted space. Dark wood desk, law books on shelves, framed certificates proving competence. He stood when I entered, extended his hand. Mr. Mills, punctual. I appreciate that. He gestured me to a chair. Let's see what we're working with. I spread the documents systematically. Keith's actual medical records showing no cardiac issues. Text messages discussing payment and timeline. Gertrude's handwritten asset list. Photos of my ransacked study, each time stamped. Grace's formal complaint. Clark absorbed it all, making notes with precise handwriting. He asked questions, exact dates, who knew what when, whether I'd confronted them. I answered each one completely, factually. This is thoroughly documented, he said finally. The fraud attempt is clear. We can move on multiple fronts, eviction based on threat to your safety, will modification, and potentially civil damages. How quickly can we move? Eviction notice can be served today. Arizona law requires 30-day notice for tenants without written leases. But given the documented fraud attempt, we can petition for expedited removal. Will change requires a notary. I can arrange that for this afternoon. He looked up. You want all 3 actions initiated simultaneously? Yes, don't give them time to regroup. He nodded approval. Smart tactical thinking. They'll be scrambling to respond on multiple fronts. Makes coordinated defense almost impossible. We spent 90 minutes building the strategy. Clark explained each step. Eviction, based on verbal agreement, termination, plus fraud, gave us solid standing. Will change removing Keith as beneficiary, naming a charitable foundation instead. He suggested the Phoenix Firefighters Benevolent Fund, civil suit for attempted theft, though Clark noted that was more symbolic than profitable. The eviction and will change are your real weapons, he said. Everything else is leverage. At 10:47, my phone rang. Keith's name on the screen. I excused myself, stepped into the hallway. The corridor was empty, quiet. I answered on the 4th ring. Dad? His voice carried strain I'd never heard before. Something went wrong. The doctor, they're investigating him. He says he can't help anymore. They're asking questions about my medical records. He got suspended this morning. Just suspended. I let the silence stretch. Let him feel it. Maybe you should tell the truth about your heart attack, Keith. The pause lasted 5 heartbeats. Then his voice came back smaller, broken. You know. I know everything, every word, every plan, every dollar you intended to steal, the text messages between you and Dr. Grant, the 3 weeks you spent planning, the $15,000 you promised him, Gertrude searching my study and cataloging my assets, all of it. Dad, I can explain. No, you can't. I ended the call, stood in the corridor for a moment, phone still in my hand. Decades of emergency responses had taught me. Confirm your strike landed before moving to the next objective. Strike 1, confirmed. The doctor neutralized. My son, aware that I know everything. I returned to Clark's office. He looked up, reading my expression. Problem? No, just confirmation that the first phase is working. Dr. Grant has been suspended. My son knows I'm aware of the conspiracy. Clark's smile held professional satisfaction. Then they're already in disarray. Perfect timing for phase 2. Let's finish these documents. I pulled into my driveway at 2:30, legal documents in a manila envelope on the passenger seat. The eviction notice, printed and signed. Appointment slip for the notary at 4 p.m. to execute the will change. Phase 2, loaded and ready. I'd barely stepped through my front door when Keith's car appeared, tires squealing as it jerked into the driveway at a sharp angle. They'd been waiting somewhere, watching for my return. I set the envelope on the hall table and turned to face the door. Didn't move deeper into the house, just stood there, waiting. They didn't knock. Gertrude burst through first, keys jangling, fury radiating from every movement. Keith followed, face flushed, hands clenched. "What did you do?" Gertrude's scream filled my living room. "You destroyed us. You went to the medical board, you talked to lawyers, you're trying to ruin your own son." I stood my ground, didn't retreat, kept my arms at my sides, expression neutral. "I stopped you from robbing me. There's a difference." "We weren't robbing you," she paced, gesturing wildly. "We were trying to secure our future. You have all this money just sitting there doing nothing. My money." I let each word land separately. "That I earned." Keith moved forward, less aggressive than Gertrude, but desperate. His voice came ragged. "Dad, I'm drowning here. 85,000 in debt. Collection agencies calling every day. I didn't know what else to do." The admission hung between us. Finally, truth. Not that it changed anything. "You could have asked me for help." His laugh came bitter, sharp. "Would you have given it?" I met his eyes steadily. "I guess we'll never know. You chose to fake a heart attack and steal from me instead of having that conversation." Gertrude shifted tactics immediately. I watched it happen, calculation crossing her face. Her voice softened, took on pleading tones. "Orval, we're not going anywhere. This is our home too. We have rights. We're family." "No." Simple, final. "This is my home. You're guests who overstayed." Keith stood abruptly. "I'll get a lawyer. I'll fight this. I'll tell everyone what kind of father turns his back on his own son in his time of need." "We'll tell them you threw us out with nothing," Gertrude added, stepping closer to Keith. "How cruel you are. How heartless." I said nothing, just looked at them, let the silence stretch, let them fill it with their own doubts. Silence was more powerful than any argument. They wanted a reaction, wanted me angry or defensive or guilty, wanted some emotional opening to exploit. I gave them nothing. Keith's jaw worked, muscles clenching. "You can't just—" "I can." 2 words, flat, final. They stood there, breath coming fast, realizing their threats were bouncing off armor they hadn't expected. The father they'd planned to manipulate, he wasn't here. Someone else stood in his place. Finally, Gertrude grabbed Keith's arm. "Come on, we need to talk." They retreated to their bedroom. I heard the door close hard, not quite a slam. Then urgent voices muffled through walls. I picked up the manila envelope from the hall table and carried it to my study. Placed it in the center of my desk where I'd see it in the morning. Tomorrow, I'd serve the eviction notice. Today I had a notary appointment to finalize the will change. Evening settled over the house. I made dinner, just for myself, something I hadn't done since they'd moved in 6 months ago. Grilled chicken, steamed vegetables, rice, simple. Enough. I ate at my kitchen table, reading through the eviction notice one more time, 30 days. That's what the law required for tenants without leases. But Martin Clark had been clear. Given the documented fraud attempt, if they fought the eviction, the judge would likely accelerate the timeline. Their credibility was destroyed before they even entered a courtroom. Around 8 p.m., I heard Keith's voice through their closed bedroom door. On the phone. That lawyer he'd threatened to hire. I turned off my desk lamp and sat in the darkness, listening. His voice rose and fell, long pauses where someone else spoke. Then Keith's responses, getting quieter, shorter, the tone shifting from angry to defensive to something like resignation. After 30 minutes, silence. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know how it went. Any competent lawyer would tell them the same thing Martin Clark had told me. No written agreement meant weak position. Evidence of fraud attempt meant destroyed credibility. Threats to fight it meant wasted money on an unwinnable case. The next morning would bring the eviction notice delivered in person. The afternoon would bring documentation of the completed will change. But tonight, I let them sit with whatever hope their lawyer had left them. False hope, probably. The kind that makes the final blow hit harder. I went to my bedroom early, locked the door behind me, something I'd started doing the night I discovered their scheme. Lay in the darkness, listening to the house settle around me. Tomorrow would be long, tomorrow would end this. But tonight, in their room down the hall, Keith and Gertrude were still believing they might salvage something. Maybe the lawyer had said something about tenant rights, about 30-day notices, about their ability to delay. Let them believe it for one more night. The truth would find them soon enough. And when it did, they'd realize that every day they'd spent planning my destruction, I'd been 3 moves ahead. Tomorrow, truth would come knocking. Morning arrived with false hope still breathing in their bedroom. I'd been awake since 5, dressed by 6, coffee made by 7, waiting. The doorbell rang at 9. Martin Clark stood on my doorstep, briefcase in hand, suit pressed sharp. Professional, final. "Mr. Mills." He nodded. "Shall we proceed?" I stepped aside, let him enter, heard footsteps on the stairs. Keith came down first, stopped halfway when he saw the lawyer, his face drained. "What's this about?" Gertrude emerged from the kitchen, coffee cup frozen. Clark moved to the living room, set his briefcase on the coffee table. "I'm Martin Clark, attorney for Mr. Orville Mills. I'm here to serve legal notice to Keith Mills and Gertrude Mills." He opened the briefcase. "May we sit?" Nobody sat. Clark extracted documents, arranged them with practiced efficiency. "Under the Arizona Residential Landlord and Tenant Act, you are classified as tenants at will, residing without a written lease agreement. Typically, this requires 30 days' notice for termination of tenancy." Gertrude's face brightened slightly. 30 days? However, Clark continued, not looking up, Arizona law provides exception for immediate eviction when the tenant poses a threat to the property owner's safety. Your documented attempt to defraud Mr. Mills constitutes such a threat. Keith picked up the top document, hands shaking. "That's not fair. We never physically threatened. Fraud is a threat. The law is clear." Clark's tone remained clinical. "You have 72 hours to vacate the premises." 3 days? Gertrude's voice climbed. "That's impossible. Where are we supposed to go?" "That's not my concern." Clark pulled another document from his briefcase. "Additionally, Mr. Mills is filing a civil suit for $50,000 in damages related to your fraud attempt." Keith turned to me. First time he'd looked directly at me since Clark arrived. "Dad, this is insane. You can't do this. I'm your son." I'd been standing near the doorway, arms crossed. Now I spoke. "You stopped being my son when you decided to rob me." Gertrude moved toward me, tears already forming. "Orval, please. We made a mistake. We're sorry. Don't do this to us. We'll pay you back. You made your choice. I'm making mine." Her voice broke into sobs. "You're cruel. You're heartless. What kind of father throws his own son onto the street? The kind who won't be victimized in his own home." Keith was reading the eviction notice, lips moving silently. 72 hours. Starting when? "Starting now." Clark checked his watch. "As of 9:17 a.m., March 14th. You must be fully vacated by 9:17 a.m., March 17th. Gertrude paced, hands in her hair. "This can't be legal. You can't just throw people out." "I assure you, it's entirely legal given the circumstances." Clark remained seated, unfazed. The documented fraud attempt, the text messages, the witness testimony, all of this establishes clear grounds for expedited eviction. Keith threw the papers onto the table. "I'll fight this. I'll get my own lawyer. You're welcome to try." Clark's expression didn't change. "But I should inform you that any legal challenge will be costly and, given the evidence, unsuccessful." The mention shut Keith down. His shoulders slumped. Clark stood, straightened his tie, collected his briefcase. "All relevant documents have been served. Failure to vacate within 72 hours will result in forced removal by law enforcement. Locks will be changed." He looked at them both. "Do you understand?" Keith nodded, defeated. "Yeah, we understand." Clark moved toward the door. I walked with him. Behind us, Gertrude's crying continued. At the threshold, Clark lowered his voice. "The will change appointment is set for 3 p.m. today. Are you still comfortable proceeding?" "Yes." "Good. I'll see you this afternoon." He walked to his car, drove away. I closed the door and turned back. Keith and Gertrude stood among scattered legal documents. 3 days. 72 hours. The countdown had begun. Keith looked at me, really looked at me, searching for something, mercy, weakness, fatherly love, overriding justice. He wouldn't find it. "You really mean this?" he said quietly, not a question, a realization. Every word. Gertrude grabbed his arm. Come on, we need to start packing. We need to find somewhere. They retreated to their bedroom. The door closed. I heard muffled voices, urgent planning, the sounds of people whose world was collapsing. I walked to my study, sat at my desk, looked at the calendar. March 14th. 3 days until they'd be gone. 3 days until my home would be mine again. The legal machinery was in motion. No stopping it, no reversing it. The eviction notice wasn't a threat. It was a countdown timer, ticking toward their departure. I had one more strike left to deliver. This afternoon, the will would change, and they'd lose not just their present, but their entire imagined future. I left the house at 2:30, told them I had appointments, didn't elaborate. The drive to Martin Clark's office took 25 minutes. I parked underground, took the elevator to the 7th floor. Clark met me personally. Mr. Mills, right on time, the notary is waiting. We walked to a conference room with a polished table. A woman in her mid-50s sat at one end, official stamp and logbook before her. This is Patricia Simmons, licensed notary public. Clark made the introduction. I sat across from her. Clark placed the new will before me, 30 pages that boiled down to one truth. Keith would inherit nothing. Mr. Mills, Patricia began formally, please state for the record, are you making this change of your own free will, without coercion and of sound mind? Yes, I am of sound mind and acting freely. My son attempted to defraud me, and I will not reward that behavior with inheritance. Clark slid the document closer. The explicit disinheritance clause will prevent future challenges. I read through each page. The house, $420,000 estimated value, would go to Phoenix firefighters' charities. My retirement savings, $280,000, would go to the same organization. Everything I'd built would help families of fallen firefighters. On page 23, Keith's name appeared, not as beneficiary, as excluded party, with reasons listed: betrayal of trust, attempted fraud, conspiracy to steal. Good, I said, initialing each page. I want no doubt about my intentions. I signed the final page. Patricia witnessed, added her signature and seal. Clark placed the original in a fireproof folder, handed me a certified copy. It's done, he said. $700,000, completely removed from Keith's reach. I drove home. Early evening when I pulled into the driveway. Boxes sat in the hallway, visible through the window. Their 72-hour countdown underway. I entered through the front door, clothes folded on the couch, more boxes stacked against walls. Keith emerged from the bedroom carrying a box of books, stopped when he saw me, set the box down. We need to talk, I said. Get Gertrude. His expression tightened. What now? You're already throwing us out. Get her. He disappeared, returned with Gertrude. Both looked exhausted from hours of packing. I held up the certified copy. I changed my will today. You're no longer a beneficiary. Keith blinked. What? Everything, the house, my savings, all of it, goes to Phoenix firefighters' charities. You inherit nothing. The words hung for 3 seconds. Then Keith grabbed for the document. I didn't resist. His hands shook violently. His eyes scanned line after line. $700,000. His voice came strangled. You're giving away $700,000 to strangers? To an organization that helps families of fallen firefighters, people who actually served others. Gertrude read over his shoulder, her face graying. This says, you excluded him because of fraud. You put it in writing. Yes, so there's no confusion later about why. Keith's control shattered. The document fell from his hands, scattered. You destroyed my life. That money was supposed to be mine. I'm your son. I kept my voice level, cold. No. You destroyed your own life when you decided to rob your father. I simply protected myself. I'm drowning in debt, his scream filled the room. $85,000 in collection. I needed that money. You're killing me. You needed to ask for help. You chose to steal instead. Those are different things. He collapsed onto the couch, head in hands, making sounds that weren't quite words. Gertrude tried to touch his shoulder, but he shook her off. I can't survive this, he gasped. The debt, no house, no inheritance. You'll survive. You just won't do it with my money. I turned toward my study. Behind me, Keith's hysteria continued, broken sounds of someone watching their future burn. Gertrude picked up the scattered will pages, reading them again as if they might change. They wouldn't. I entered my study, closed the door, sat at my desk. Through the wall, I heard Keith shouting, Gertrude's attempts to calm him. 3 strikes, all delivered, all landed, the doctor suspended. The eviction served, 72 hours counting down. The will changed, $700,000 redirected to people who understood service instead of entitlement. My phone buzzed, text from Grace. Medical board hearing scheduled for Grant next week. They move fast when evidence is solid. I type back, available whenever needed. Another text from Martin Clark. Will is filed and recorded, ironclad. I set my phone down, looked at the closed door. Beyond it, my son was learning what it felt like to lose everything he'd counted on stealing. Tomorrow they'd continue packing, the next day more packing, the day after that they'd be gone, and I'd still be here, in my home, protected by law, fortified by justice. The revenge was nearly complete. Just 3 more days. Morning arrived with the rental truck already in the driveway. I'd heard them through the night, boxes dragging across floors, muffled arguments, the sounds of people dismantling their temporary life in my home. Sleep had come in fragments, interrupted by thuds and whispers and the occasional slam of a closet door. Now, March 15th, the 72-hour deadline expired today. They were leaving. I stood at the living room window, coffee cup in hand, watching Keith carry boxes down the front steps. The morning sun cast long shadows across my lawn, turning everything golden and sharp. His movements were aggressive, jerky. Each box slammed into the truck bed with more force than necessary, rage leaking through physical action, every gesture a wordless accusation. Gertrude supervised from the driveway, pointing, directing, occasionally wiping her eyes with a tissue she kept wadded in her palm. Performance or genuine tears. After everything, I couldn't tell anymore. Didn't matter anymore. I didn't help, didn't offer, didn't even step outside. Just observed from my position at the window, coffee cooling in my hand, watching my son and his wife extract themselves from my life piece by piece. The rental truck was small, one of those basic U-Haul models that screamed temporary housing and financial struggle. 6 months ago, they'd arrived in Keith's sedan with confidence and suitcases. Now they were leaving in a rental truck with everything they owned, heading toward an uncertain future they'd created through their own choices. Keith made trip after trip, bedroom furniture they'd brought with them, kitchen items, a coffee maker, dishes, pots they'd contributed to the household, clothes on hangers, still draped in dry cleaning plastic, books in boxes labeled with Gertrude's neat handwriting. The accumulated debris of 6 months living in my house, now being extracted like a surgical removal of something that had tried to take root but failed. I watched him struggle with a particularly heavy box, probably books or Keith's collection of old textbooks from his failed business ventures. He shifted his grip twice, muscles straining, face reddening with effort and humiliation. The man who'd once worked in middle management, who'd worn suits and attended conferences, now doing manual labor to move his possessions into a life of reduced circumstances, poetic in its way. Gertrude walked back toward the house one final time. Her heels clicked on the walkway. She'd dressed carefully, even for moving day, maintaining appearances even in defeat. She stood in the doorway, facing me through the screen door. Didn't open it, just stood there, silhouetted against the morning light. Orval. Her voice came softer than yesterday's screaming, calculated to sound vulnerable. Before we go, think about what you're losing. We could have given you grandchildren, a real family, holiday dinners, birthday celebrations. You're going to die alone in this house, surrounded by nothing but your pride. I looked at her over the rim of my coffee cup, didn't respond, just held her gaze, letting my silence speak louder than any words I could offer. Her manipulation tactics were transparent now, desperate plays from a losing hand. You're choosing pride over family, she continued, trying to fill my silence with her interpretation of it. You're choosing to be bitter and alone, rather than forgive a mistake. That's sad, Orval. That's really sad. I took a slow sip of coffee, deliberate, unhurried, a physical dismissal more effective than any verbal response. Gertrude! Keith's voice from the truck, impatient and sharp. Let's go. He's not going to change his mind. Stop wasting your breath. She stared at me a moment longer, searching my face for something. Weakness, doubt, regret. Finding nothing, her expression hardened. The vulnerability mask dropped, replaced by something colder, more honest. "You're a cruel man," she said, voice flat now, theatrical warmth gone. "A cruel, vindictive old man. I hope you enjoy your empty house and your empty life." She turned and walked back to the truck, heels clicking with finality. Keith carried the last box, his laptop bag and personal items, things he'd kept close until the end. He paused as he passed through the living room one final time, close enough that I could see the exhaustion etched into his face, the dark circles under his eyes, the humiliation that had settled into his posture like a weight he couldn't shake. "You'll regret this someday, old man." His voice trembled between rage and something else, grief, maybe, or the recognition of irreversible loss. When you're dying alone in some hospital bed, with no family around you, you'll wish you'd been different. You'll wish you'd forgiven us. First words I'd spoken to them all morning, calm, clear, final. "The only thing I regret is not seeing who you really were sooner." He stopped, turned to face me fully, laptop bag still in his hand. "What?" "You showed me exactly who you are, Keith. A thief who hides behind family bonds. A man who'd rather steal from his father than ask for help. I saw it clearly. Finally." His voice broke. "I'm your son." "Not anymore." The words hung in the air like smoke from extinguished fire. Final, irreversible. A relationship severed cleanly, cauterized by betrayal. Keith's face went through several expressions: anger, pain, disbelief, desperate hope that maybe I didn't mean it, then slow resignation as he understood I did. His jaw clenched, his eyes glistened, but no tears fell. He'd cried himself out overnight, probably. Now there was just emptiness. He turned and walked out, down my front steps, across the driveway, into the truck. The door slammed with a hollow thud. I stayed at the window as the engine started. As they backed out of the driveway, Gertrude in the passenger seat not looking back, Keith's hands tight on the wheel. As the truck rolled down my street, careful around the neighbors' parked cars, signaling at the corner with mechanical precision, as it turned left and disappeared behind the Johnsons' fence. I stood there for several minutes after they were gone. The street looked normal, Mrs. Chen walking her dog, a postal truck making its rounds. Nothing to indicate that something significant had just ended, that a chapter had closed, that betrayers had been expelled and justice had been served. The house felt different immediately, lighter somehow. The air seemed cleaner. Around 2 that afternoon, my phone rang, Grace's name on the screen. "Orval, I wanted you to know. The medical board issued their ruling today." I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Keith and Gertrude had eaten meals for 6 months, pretending to be struggling family while cataloging what they could steal. "Tell me." "Dr. Grant is suspended for 6 months and fined $25,000, effective immediately. But there's more." She paused, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "They're continuing to investigate. When they pulled his file, they found 3 other complaints, different patients, different circumstances, but similar patterns of unethical conduct. What does that mean long term? If those cases check out, and preliminary review suggests they will, he'll lose his license permanently. He'll never practice medicine again, Orval. Never." I absorbed that information, felt it settle into place alongside everything else. Good. He shouldn't. A man willing to falsify medical records for money? He shouldn't be trusted with anyone's health. I know this cost you your relationship with your son. I'm sorry it came to that. Don't be. I looked around my kitchen, empty now except for my things, my coffee cup, my morning paper spread on the table. You showed me who was trustworthy when everyone else was showing me who they weren't. That mattered more than blood relations. Still, family is complicated. So is betrayal. I took a breath. Thank you, Grace, for your courage, for risking your career to do what was right. "I'd do it again," she said simply. "Take care of yourself, Orval." Evening came with its own quiet. I walked through the house room by room, turning on lights as darkness settled outside. Their bedroom, empty now, except for the furniture I'd had before they arrived. The bed was stripped, pillows gone, closet doors hanging open to reveal vacant space. The bathroom, no more of Gertrude's extensive collection of products cluttering the counter. No more Keith's electric razor charging by the sink. The hallway closet where their coats had hung, empty hangers now, just space. The spare room they had used for storage, cleared out, just carpet with slight depressions where boxes had sat for months. In my study, I sat at my desk. The folder of legal documents still sat where I'd left it. Eviction notice, will change, civil lawsuit filing, medical board complaint. Each page represented a decision, a action, a consequence. Evidence of systematic justice, documented and delivered. I touched the folder briefly, ran my fingers across its edge. Then I closed it and placed it in my desk drawer. Not forgotten, but filed away. Done. Outside my window, darkness had settled completely now. My reflection stared back at me from the glass. 64 years old, alone again. Face lined with age and experience, and the particular weariness that comes from being betrayed by family. But also, satisfied. At peace. Victorious in a battle I'd never wanted to fight, but had won decisively. The house was quiet now. Different than before, they'd moved in. This silence was mine. Nobody was plotting in another room. Nobody was cataloging my assets or planning my exploitation. Nobody was whispering about what they'd do with my money when I was gone. This silence was earned, clean, safe. I'd given decades to service, saved lives, built security through honest work over years of discipline and sacrifice. Keith thought he could take that. The money, the dignity, the peace I'd earned. He couldn't. The law had protected what I'd earned. Grace had helped me see the truth before it was too late. And now the house was mine again, truly mine, in a way it hadn't been since they had moved in. I sat in my study as night deepened outside, the legal folder safely stored away, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Safe in my own home. The weeks after they left moved in a rhythm of legal proceedings and quiet reclamation. I cleaned their room thoroughly, opened windows to air out spaces that had held their presence, rearranged furniture back to where I'd had it before, small acts of restoration, piece by piece taking back what had been mine. Spring arrived gradually. Phoenix temperatures climbed from pleasant to warm to the edge of hot. Jacaranda trees bloomed purple along the streets. Life continued its forward march, indifferent to human drama. By May, the legal outcomes I'd set in motion reached their conclusions. The court envelope appeared in my mailbox on a Tuesday, thick with official documents. I recognized the return address, Superior Court of Arizona, Maricopa County. I carried it inside carefully, sat at my kitchen table in the morning light, opened it with the letter opener I'd used for 30 years. Civil lawsuit resolution. I read through the legal language, the whereas clauses and plaintiff-defendant terminology until I reached the judgment. The court hereby awards Plaintiff Orville Mills damages in the amount of $30,000, payable by defendant Keith Mills in monthly installments of $833.33, $833.33, over a period of 36 months. I read it twice, then a third time. $30,000 instead of the $50,000 I'd requested. The court had considered Keith's financial situation, his reduced circumstances, the reality that you can't extract blood from a stone. But $30,000 over 3 years meant every single month for the next 36 months, Keith would have to write me a check. Every payment would arrive as a reminder of what he'd tried to do, what he'd lost, what it cost to betray your father. That felt appropriate, more appropriate perhaps than a single lump sum. This was ongoing consequence, sustained accountability, long-term justice. I set the documents down, sat back in my chair, let the finality of it settle over me. The legal system had worked, slowly, methodically, but it had worked. Every filing, every piece of evidence, every documented lie had been weighed and measured, and justice had been rendered. Later that week, Grace called with news. Permanent revocation, she said, without preamble. I could hear the satisfaction in her voice, the vindication of seeing systems work the way they should. The medical board completed their investigation. Dr. Grant's license has been permanently revoked. He'll never practice medicine again. The other 3 cases? All substantiated. One was similar to Keith's situation, falsified emergency to pressure a family member into signing financial documents. The other 2 involved insurance fraud, billing for procedures he never performed. The pattern was clear once they started looking. I felt something ease in my chest. So we didn't just stop him from hurting me. We stopped him from hurting anyone else, ever. That doctor's career is over, Orval. Finished. And it should be. How's the hospital handling it? Internal investigation, reviews of all his cases, policy changes about documentation verification. They're taking it seriously. They have to. The liability exposure is significant. We talked for a few more minutes about procedures and outcomes, and the satisfaction of seeing corruption exposed. Before hanging up, she mentioned she'd heard through the hospital grapevine that Keith and Gertrude had divorced. Apparently, she blamed him for the plan failing, Grace said. Filed for divorce within a month of leaving your house. I heard she's living with her sister in Tucson now. After the call, I sat with that information. Even the conspirators had turned on each other. Their relationship, built on shared greed and manipulation, couldn't survive failure. When the scheme collapsed, so did their unity. Betrayers betraying each other. There was a certain symmetry to it. I learned more about Keith's situation through indirect channels. Phoenix isn't a huge city in some ways. People know people. Word travels. A former colleague mentioned seeing Keith at a warehouse job, stacking boxes on the night shift. Another neighbor heard from someone that he was living in a cheap apartment near the airport, the kind with thin walls and week-to-week leases, the fall from middle-class comfort to working poverty, the consequence of choosing theft over honesty, manipulation over trust. One afternoon in late May, I was sitting on my back patio, reading the newspaper and enjoying coffee, when my phone buzzed with a text message, Keith's name on the screen. I stared at it for a moment before opening it. One word. Just one word. Sorry I held the phone, thumb hovering over the keyboard. 1,000 possible responses ran through my mind. Questions. Sorry for what, specifically? Sorry you got caught? Sorry you failed? Accusations. You're not sorry, you're desperate. Dismissals. Too late for that now. But ultimately, I typed nothing. Instead, I pressed delete. Watched the message disappear from my screen. Set the phone face down on the patio table. That word, sorry, didn't undo the conspiracy. Didn't erase the 3 weeks of planning. Didn't change the fact that he'd faked a medical emergency, involved a corrupt doctor, plotted to steal $700,000, search my home, and catalog my assets like a thief casing a target. Sorry was insufficient. A single word against months of betrayal. And more than that, I wasn't required to accept it. Forgiveness wasn't an obligation. Boundaries didn't need justification. Keith had made his choice. I'd made mine. The word sorry didn't bridge that gap. A few days later, I called Grace and invited her for coffee. We met at a small cafe near downtown Phoenix, one with outdoor seating under umbrellas and a view of the mountains in the distance. Spring in Arizona, before the brutal summer arrived, was perfect. Warm, but not hot. Clear skies, comfortable. Grace arrived right on time, as she always did. Nurse's punctuality, probably. We ordered coffee. She got something complicated with oat milk and vanilla. I got black coffee like I'd been drinking for 40 years, and settled into comfortable conversation. I heard the court ruled in your favor, she said. I'm glad. You deserve that. Reduced amount, but yes, 3-year payment plan. Every month for 36 months, Keith sends me a check. She smiled slightly. Long-term reminder. Exactly. And Dr. Grant? Permanent revocation. The investigation found 3 other cases. Similar patterns. He's done. Grace's expression held deep satisfaction. So, we didn't just stop him once. We stopped him from doing it again. To anyone. That matters, Orval. That really matters. It does. I took a sip of coffee, felt the warmth, the bitterness, the familiarity of it. Thank you for that. For seeing what was happening and having the courage to intervene. I couldn't not intervene. I've been a nurse too long, seen too much. When you know something is wrong and you stay silent, you become complicit. We talked about justice and systems and the satisfaction of seeing ethical principles applied, not just stated. About the difference between revenge and accountability, between punishment and consequence. How are you doing? She asked eventually carefully. With everything, with being alone again? Better than I expected. I gestured vaguely. The house is quiet, different than before they moved in. This quiet is mine, earned. I'm adjusting. Have you heard from Keith at all? As if on cue, my phone buzzed on the table between us. I glanced at it. Another text notification. Keith's name. Actually, yes. He texted a few days ago. Just said sorry. And just now, apparently again. Are you going to respond? I picked up the phone, read the new message, also just, sorry, as if repetition would add weight. Then I deleted it, set the phone face down on the table. No, that word doesn't undo what he did, and I'm not required to accept it. Forgiveness isn't an obligation I owe him, just because we share DNA. Grace nodded slowly. That's fair. Forgiveness has to be earned, not just requested. And boundaries are healthy, even with family. Especially with family. I've been thinking about what comes next, I said, shifting the conversation forward. About purpose and contribution, and not just existing. And I'm going to volunteer with Phoenix Firefighters Charities, the organization I left my estate to. Her face brightened. Really? That's wonderful, Orval. If I'm giving them everything eventually, I should know what they do, help while I still can. And, I paused, finding the right words. Turns out I'm not done serving yet. I just needed to remove the people who were using me instead of valuing me. That's really wonderful, she repeated. Meaningful work with people who understand service and sacrifice. That's exactly what you need. We finished our coffee, talked about her work at the hospital, about the policy changes they were implementing, about the satisfaction of seeing systems improve. Before leaving, she gave me a quick hug, brief, professional, but genuine. You're going to be fine, Orval, better than fine. I know. The volunteer orientation at Phoenix Firefighters Charities happened on a Thursday morning. The building was modest but well-maintained, with photos of firefighters lining the hallway and plaques honoring fallen heroes. I signed registration forms, received orientation materials, listened as the coordinator explained the mission. Phoenix Firefighters Charities supports families who have lost loved ones in the line of duty, she explained to our small group. 8 retired firefighters, all seeking purpose beyond pension. We provide financial assistance, counseling services, educational support for children. Your experience means you understand what these families are going through. You can offer not just help, but understanding. I sat in a circle with the other volunteers, introducing ourselves around the room. When my turn came, Orval Mills, 32 years with Phoenix Fire Department, Inspector Division, certified in fire investigation, building safety, code enforcement. The man beside me, probably my age, with the same weathered look that comes from decades of emergency work, shook my hand. Dan Reeves, 28 years engine company, good to meet you. We need people with inspector background. A lot of families need help with insurance claims, documentation, understanding what happened. The orientation covered procedures, family support programs, fundraising events, volunteer schedules. I took notes, asked questions, felt something unfamiliar settling in my chest. Purpose. Forward-looking. Not defensive or protective, but contributory. After the meeting, I walked to my truck in the parking lot. Spring afternoon, temperature perfect, sky clear, that particular Arizona blue that looks almost artificial. Phoenix in May, before the brutal summer arrived, before temperatures climbed above 100 and stayed there for months. I got in my truck, the same 15-year-old vehicle Keith had mocked for being old and shabby, started the engine, pulled out of the parking lot, headed home. My home, secured, protected, mine. The court judgment meant Keith would be paying me for 3 years, $833.33 every month, regular as clockwork, monitored by the court. His warehouse job barely covered that, plus his existing $85,000 in debt. I knew he was struggling, knew the cheap apartment and night shift work and financial stress were crushing him slowly. That was consequence. Not revenge, consequence. Gertrude had divorced him, blamed him for the plan's failure, left him alone with the wreckage of their conspiracy. She'd gotten away relatively unscathed, no court judgment against her, no debt beyond what she'd already carried. She'd been smart enough to let Keith take legal ownership of the fraud attempt, positioning herself as merely the supporting spouse. Dr. Grant had lost everything. Medical license revoked permanently, career destroyed, reputation ruined. The system had worked, slowly, bureaucratically, but it had worked. And I had my house, my assets, my dignity, my new purpose volunteering with an organization that understood service and sacrifice, that honored the values I'd built my career around. Keith had texted sorry twice now, 2 words across 2 messages, as if saying it again would add weight or sincerity. 2 words that didn't acknowledge what he'd actually done, didn't take real responsibility, didn't offer anything except the expectation that I should accept and move on. I wouldn't. Boundaries held. Forgiveness wasn't required. Sorry wasn't sufficient. The relationship was severed, not in anger, not in revenge, but in cold assessment of reality. He'd shown me who he was, I'd believed him, and I'd acted accordingly. That evening, I sat in my study one final time with the legal folder, reviewed everything methodically. The evidence Grace had gathered, the complaints filed, the eviction notice served, the will changed, the court judgment awarded. Justice, documented and delivered, not revenge. Justice. I gave 3 decades to service, ran into burning buildings when others ran out, pulled people from smoke and flames and collapsing structures, saved lives, investigated fires to prevent future deaths, built a life through honest work and disciplined saving and careful planning. Keith thought he could take that from me. The money, the security, the dignity I'd earned through service. He couldn't. The law protected what I'd earned honestly. Grace helped me see the truth before it was too late. The courts validated my position and awarded damages. The medical board ensured Dr. Grant would never harm another patient. Keith would spend years paying for his betrayal, literally and financially. And I would spend my remaining years contributing to something meaningful, helping families who'd lost loved ones to service, using my security to serve others who understood sacrifice, living with purpose, not just existing in bitter isolation. Keith got nothing. Not my money beyond the court-ordered monthly reminders of his betrayal, not my forgiveness, not my regret, not my doubt about whether I'd made the right choices. He made his choice. I made mine. I won. The house was quiet that night. Clean quiet, earned quiet, safe quiet. I sat at my desk, closed the legal folder for the final time, placed it in the drawer where it would remain, not forgotten, but concluded. Done. Outside my window, the Phoenix night spread vast and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. My reflection looked back at me from the glass, 64 years old, alone but not lonely, victorious but not vengeful. Tomorrow I'd wake up in my house, drink my coffee, read my paper. In a few weeks I'd start my volunteer work, meet families who needed help, provide assistance from a place of understanding and shared experience. Keith would wake up in his cheap apartment, work his warehouse shift, write me a check that would arrive in my mailbox as scheduled. Gertrude would wake up in Tucson, probably already plotting her next scheme, her next target, having learned nothing except that she'd chosen the wrong partner. Dr. Grant would wake up unemployed, unemployable in his profession, facing the reality that corruption has consequences. And Grace would wake up satisfied, knowing that speaking truth had prevented harm, that courage had mattered, that the system could work when good people refused to stay silent. Different mornings for different people, each the result of choices made and paths taken. I turned off my desk lamp, stood, walked to my bedroom. My house, quiet around me, safe, mine. Justice had been served. Boundaries had held. Life continued with meaning. That was enough. That was victory. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.